later, the court's legalization of gay marriage in Obergefell versus Hodges surprised almost no one. Well, that's true. Both cases mark historic losses for American evangelicals. Minutes after Friday's ruling, Southern Baptist leader Russell Moore called it the Roe v. Wade of marriage. Though many evangelicals oppose abortion and gay marriage as violations of natural law, they are significantly different issues with different social consequences. As Christians, we recognize the value of God-given life. When society authorizes the deprivation of life, we commit the gravest possible injustice. The results of abortion are as immediate, visceral, and individual as they are sweeping. An estimated 20% of pregnancies in the U.S. that end in abortion, over 56 million since 1973. The social consequences of legalizing same-sex marriage have yet to be seen. Currently, they comprise less than 0.5% of all married couples in the country, and unlike abortion, gay marriage remains an act rooted in love. As Wesley Hill writes, even if we disagree with the expression of homosexuality, we can affirm the longing to be loved and belong. And so I didn't stop there, but I was immediately caused to stop at that point and go, That goes on to say, yet what abortion and same-sex marriage have in common is that they each attempt to deny the procreative nature of the sexual union. Each forms a deep crack in the mirror of nature that reflects the image of God. Okay, but I was immediately troubled. And as I read more of the article, I became more troubled. Because Dr. Pryor seems to very much embrace a lot of the terminology that I believe requires a compromise of our position from the very beginning. The acceptance of a community based upon aberrant sexual behavior. I'm sorry, I cannot understand how there is anything called an LGBT community, because the L, G, and the B and the T are all different. Transsexualism and homosexuality, the only thing they seem to have together from a biblical perspective is tremendous confusion and an assertion of absolute human autonomy. But bisexualism, again, very, very different from everything you did. There's such a confusion in those four letters, that putting them together is like taking magnets that are repelling each other and trying to hold them together. They're just, I don't understand how anyone who is thoughtful from a biblical perspective can use the term LGBT community. It's wrong on every level that it can be wrong on, but it's part of just what's the given anymore. You just have to do it to have a place at the table. I don't want a place at that table. If what's being served at that table is poisonous, I don't want it. Anyways, the point is this. And unlike abortion, gay marriage remains an act rooted in love. The term love, loving, in the Christian context, will always and always has had meaning that the unregenerate person cannot even begin to comprehend. And again, we're talking about how Christians should respond to these issues, how Christians should be speaking. There seems to be a fundamental compromise of the Christian worldview by so many today that it's extremely troubling. The millennial generation does not understand the Christian worldview when it comes to the term love. When you're constantly saying, well, you're not being loving, you're not being loving. When that terminology, that phraseology is being used of people who are seeking to be faithful to God's revelation, they are seeking to be loving. And that it is not loving from a Christian perspective to adopt a definition of love that does not have at its very root and its very center the self-sacrificial love that was demonstrated upon the cross of Calvary. But what that requires us is to recognize that true love has to understand that we live in God's world and that sin is destructive of that world, and that there's something called the wrath of God against sin. If you don't see that in the cross, you're not seeing the cross. I understand how difficult it is to try to communicate this to a rebel sinner, but I shouldn't have to be communicating this to fellow Christians. I should not have to be reminding fellow Christians that we need to be very careful in our use of that beautiful word, love. And that the last thing we should be doing is utilizing the world's definition of the word love. Gay marriage is not an act rooted in love. How can any Christian say that? How can any thoughtful Christian say that? This requires you to be using the world's definition of love, not the Christian definition of love. Because there is nothing truly loving about profaning the institution given by God to man for the continuation of the species, for the flourishing of human beings, and as a picture of Christ's self-sacrificial love for the church. That is not seen in two men committing themselves to each other for life. As warm and fuzzy as that might be, that is not and can never be biblical marriage, because there is no husband and there is no wife. Which is why immediately there are people today trying to get rid of the terminology of husband and wife in law, because there's no meaning for it anymore in light of the Supreme Court abomination. But the point is that mirror image attraction that is a same-sex relationship can never be marriage. And so it's not biblical love. It's not loving to fulfill your own aberrant lusts in that way. And it's not loving for the other person either. It involves self-love, and then it results in the damaging